Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness echo through a lifetime. In an abandoned cabin, Apache warrior Etan found 3 orphaned wolf pups crying for their mother. He should have walked away, but their desperate cries touched the emptiness in his heart from losing his own family. So he took them home and raised them as his pack. For 19 years, they lived together at his weathered homestead, bound by love deeper than blood. Then came the night of betrayal, when Etan's own people left him bleeding in a frozen canyon. In his darkest hour, it was Tiva, the last surviving wolf, who would repay a lifetime of kindness. Could a bond forged in compassion be strong enough to cheat death itself? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The desert wind carried memories across the Apache homeland, whispers of what once was and what might never be again. Etan Windrunner had learned to listen to those whispers in the 36 years he had walked this earth, though lately they spoke only of loss. His weathered hands smoothed the leather of his medicine pouch as he sat on the porch of his modest homestead, watching the sun paint the canyon walls in shades of copper and gold. Inside the small bag rested sacred herbs his grandmother had gathered, along with a lock of hair from his wife Ayana and a tiny moccasin that had belonged to his son. Both had been taken by the fever 3 winters past, leaving him as hollow as the wind-carved stones that dotted the mesa. The Apache people spoke of Etan with respect tinged by wariness. They remembered his prowess in the old conflicts, how his tomahawk had sung through the air with deadly precision. They recalled the days when young warriors sought his counsel and enemies feared the mention of his name. But that man seemed distant now, replaced by someone who preferred solitude to the warmth of the tribal fires. His homestead reflected this transformation. The cabin he had built for his family remained sturdy but simple, its log walls weathered silver by countless seasons. A small corral held his paint horse, Spotted Thunder, while a vegetable garden provided sustenance his wife once would have tended. Everything spoke of a life lived alone, yet prepared for more than one. It was in the old trapper's cabin, a mile down the canyon trail, that Etan first heard the cries that would change everything. The structure had been abandoned for years, its roof partially caved and walls sagging under the weight of neglect. Etan passed it regularly during his hunting rounds, never paying it much attention until that scorching afternoon when the desert air carried something that made him stop. Thin, desperate whimpering echoed from within the ruins. He dismounted Spotted Thunder and approached cautiously. Apache wisdom taught that abandoned places often harbored dangers, but these sounds pulled at something deep in his chest. Pushing aside the broken door, he stepped into the shadowed interior. There, huddled in the corner beneath a fallen beam, 3 wolf pups, no more than weeks old, cried for their missing mother. Their eyes had barely opened, their coats still bearing the soft fuzz of infancy. One was dark as a moonless night, another bore the silver gray of storm clouds, and the third displayed patches of brown and white like the earth after spring rain. The sight hit Etan harder than any blow he had ever received in battle. Their helpless whimpers reminded him of his own son's cries in the night, the sounds that had once brought him running with gentle hands and soothing words. His first instinct was to back away, to leave them to the harsh justice of the desert. But as he turned to go, the smallest pup, the one marked like earth and rain, let out a cry so plaintive, so full of desperate hope that his feet refused to move. "Your mother is not coming back," he whispered to them in Apache, his voice rough with emotion. "The desert has claimed her, as it claims all things." The pups continued their chorus of need, tiny bodies trembling with hunger and fear. Etan knelt beside them, studying their fragile forms. They would be dead by morning without help. The practical part of his warrior's mind catalogued the difficulties they would present. The feeding, the training, the questions from his people. Wolves were powerful medicine, respected but feared. Taking them would mark him as different, perhaps dangerous. But the father in him, the part that still ached for small voices calling his name, reached out and gently lifted the smallest pup. Its cries quieted as warmth from his hands penetrated its chilled body. The other two looked up at him with eyes that seemed far too knowing for creatures so young. "You have no pack," he said softly. "Neither do I." He fashioned a sling from his leather shirt and carefully placed all 3 pups inside. Their combined warmth settling his troubled heart in a way he had not felt since the fever took his family. The ride back to his homestead passed in contemplative silence, broken only by the occasional whimper from his unexpected charges. At home, Etan set them in a box lined with soft deerskin near his fireplace. The largest, the dark one he would eventually name Makia for his brave spirit, immediately began exploring their new confines. The silver-grey female, who he would call Ayana in honor of his lost wife's gentle nature, seemed content to curl up and sleep. But the smallest, the one who had called to his soul, this one would bear the name Tiva, for he was a survivor. That first night Etan barely slept. Every few hours, he warmed goat's milk and fed them with a piece of soft leather fashioned into a makeshift teat. Their tiny paws kneaded against his hands as they fed, their trust absolute and heartbreaking. By dawn, something had shifted in the abandoned spaces of his heart. Over the following weeks, Etan discovered that raising wolf pups required patience he had forgotten he possessed. They grew rapidly, their personalities emerging as distinctly as their physical differences. Makia proved bold and curious, often the first to investigate new sounds or objects. Ayana displayed a cautious intelligence, watching and learning before acting. But Tiva possessed something special, an intuitive understanding that seemed to transcend normal animal instinct. The hand-carved wooden bowl from which he fed them became a symbol of his transformation. Each meal was a small ceremony of care, a daily recommitment to these creatures who had wandered into his grief and made it their home. He found himself talking to them as he once had to his son, sharing stories of the old days, of hunts and battles, of traditions that seemed to grow more distant with each passing season. The Apache people began to notice changes in Etan. He appeared in the village more frequently, trading for goat's milk and supplies. There was purpose in his movements again, though few understood its source. The wise among them saw the softening around his eyes, the way his shoulders no longer carried the weight of complete despair. His closest friend, Bidsy Yellowbird, was the first to learn about the wolves. The older man had come to check on Etan during a harsh storm and found him carefully tending to 3 adolescent wolves who regarded the visitor with intelligent amber eyes. "You have taken a difficult path, my friend," Bidsy said, settling beside the fire. "Perhaps," Etan replied, watching Tiva rest his head against his knee. "But it is mine to walk." As summer gave way to autumn, the wolves grew from helpless pups into sleek young predators. Yet their loyalty to Etan never wavered. They followed him on hunting trips, learned to respond to his signals, and defended his property with fierce devotion. The bond between them deepened with each shared sunrise, each evening by the fire, each moment of quiet companionship that filled the hollow's grief had carved in his spirit. The silver trading medallion caught the firelight as Chief Nalnish held it between weathered fingers, its surface worn smooth by countless hands. The medallion bore the mark of the territorial trading post, a symbol of the changing world that pressed against Apache lands like floodwaters against a weakening dam. "The white settlers grow bolder," Nalnish said, his voice carrying the weight of years spent watching his people's world shrink. "They speak of wolf attacks on their livestock. They demand action." The tribal council sat in a circle within the ceremonial lodge, their faces painted in dancing shadows. Etan felt their eyes upon him, some curious, others disapproving. Word of his unusual companions had spread through the Apache community like smoke on the wind. Beside Nalnish sat Delsin Ironfoot, a man whose ambition had always exceeded his wisdom. His dark eyes held contempt as they fixed on Etan. "You bring shame upon our people with these wild creatures," Delsin declared. "Wolves belong in the wild, not living as pets in a warrior's home." "They are not pets," Etan replied calmly, though his jaw tightened. They are family, a murmur rippled through the council. Family was sacred to the Apache, but extending that bond to wolves challenged traditions some held dear. Family. Delsin's voice rose with indignation. You mock the memory of your true family with such words. Ayana and little Naiche rest in the spirit world, while you play nursemaid to beasts. The mention of his wife and son's names struck Etan like a physical blow. Several council members shifted uncomfortably, recognizing Delsin had crossed a sacred line. But the damage was done, hanging in the air like the scent of approaching storm. Bidsy Yellowbird spoke into the tense silence. Etan has brought no harm to our people. His wolves remain on his land, trouble no one. Yet, Delsin countered, but already the white settlers point fingers at our tribe. They say Apache wolves kill their cattle, steal their chickens. How long before their accusations become demands for compensation we cannot afford? Chief Nalnish raised his hand for silence. The silver medallion gleamed as he set it carefully on the woven mat before him. The territorial agent has sent word. There have been attacks, cattle killed, horses scattered. The settlers claim wolves are responsible. My wolves have never left my land to hunt livestock, Etan said firmly. They take only what I provide or what we hunt together in the traditional way. So you say, Delsin interjected. But can you account for their movements every moment of every day? Wolves are cunning creatures, able to travel great distances without being seen. Etan's hand moved instinctively to his tomahawk handle, its familiar weight a comfort against rising anger. The weapon had been broken in a recent training accident, its head separated from the wooden shaft. But he still carried the handle, a reminder of strength that could be fractured yet endure. I know my wolves as I know my own heartbeat, Etan said. They would not betray the trust between us? Trust, Delsin scoffed. You speak of trust with wild animals, while your own people suffer under suspicion. The settlers blame all Apache for the actions of your pets. Their anger grows with each attack, Nalnish nodded gravely. Delsin speaks truth about the settlers' anger, though his words lack courtesy. We must consider the welfare of all our people. The chief's weathered hands gestured toward the medallion. This was given to me by the territorial agent as a sign of good faith, proof of peaceful trade between our peoples. But peace is fragile when fear runs wild. What would you have me do? Etan asked, though he dreaded the answer. Send them back to the wild where they belong, Delsin demanded. Or better yet, put them down before they bring greater trouble upon us all. The suggestion hit Etan like a war club to the chest. Around the circle, he saw varying degrees of agreement in the council members' faces. Even those who had shown sympathy seemed swayed by the practical considerations Delsin raised. They saved 3 Apache children last month, Etan reminded them, when little Kanti wandered into the canyon and became lost. It was Ayana who tracked her scent and led the search party to safety. One good deed does not balance the scale against mounting threats, Delsin replied. The whites gather in greater numbers each season. Their weapons improve, while ours remain the same. We cannot afford to give them reasons for hostility. Chief Nalnish studied Etan with eyes that held both sympathy and steel. You have served our people with honor, Windrunner. Your courage in battle is legend, your loss deeply felt by all. But leadership requires difficult choices, as does loyalty, Etan responded quietly. The chief nodded slowly. Indeed, the question becomes, where does your greatest loyalty lie? With creatures who share your solitude, or with the people who share your blood? Etan felt the weight of 19 years pressing down upon him. 19 years of watching 3 helpless pups grow into magnificent wolves. 19 years of shared hunts, quiet evenings by the fire, and a bond deeper than he had thought possible after losing his human family. I will not abandon them, he said finally. They are innocent of these crimes you speak of. Delsin leaned forward, his face twisted with frustration. Then prove it. Show us these innocent creatures you defend so passionately. You wish to judge them? Etan asked. I wish to see what has blinded a once great warrior to his responsibilities. The challenge hung in the smoky air. Etan knew that bringing the wolves before the council was risky. Their wild nature might be misunderstood, their loyalty to him seen as a threat to tribal authority. But perhaps seeing them would soften hearts that fear had hardened. Very well, Etan agreed. Tomorrow, when the sun reaches its peak, I will bring them to the village edge. But I warn you, approach them with respect, or not at all. We shall see who shows respect to whom, Delsin muttered. As the council dissolved, Etan felt the weight of uncertain future settling on his shoulders. The silver medallion remained on the woven mat, forgotten in the evening's tension, its surface reflecting the dying firelight like a watching eye. Walking home through the star-filled darkness, Etan found his 3 wolves waiting on the porch as they always did, their amber eyes bright with welcome. Tiva approached first, pressing his graying muzzle against Etan's palm in a gesture of comfort that seemed to sense his troubled thoughts. Tomorrow will test us all. Old friend, Etan whispered, running his fingers through the wolf's thick fur. We must show them who we truly are. The wind carried the scent of distant storms as man and wolves entered their home together, unaware that forces beyond their small world were already moving to tear their pack apart. The broken tomahawk handle lay across Etan's workbench like a severed limb, its smooth wood split along the grain where metal had once bound to timber. He turned it slowly in his calloused hands, studying the fracture that had occurred during combat training, with young warriors eager to prove themselves against a legend. The break seemed prophetic now, a sign of the fracturing unity within his own people. Since the council meeting 3 days prior, he had noticed the subtle changes, conversations that stopped when he approached, eyes that looked away rather than meet his gaze, children who no longer called out his name in greeting. The old ways are breaking apart, just like everything else, he murmured to Makia, who lay watchfully beside the workbench. The largest of his wolves lifted his head at the sound of his voice, amber eyes reflecting intelligence that never ceased to amaze Etan. In the years since that scorching day when he had found them, the 3 wolves had grown into magnificent creatures. Makia stood nearly shoulder-high to a man, his midnight coat gleaming with health and vitality. Ayana possessed a silver-grey beauty that caught sunlight like captured moonbeams, while Tiva, though smallest, commanded respect through an almost mystical awareness of his surroundings. Today would test that bond as never before. The morning sun painted the canyon walls in shades of rust and gold as Etan prepared for the promised demonstration. He had spent hours considering how best to present his wolves to the tribal council, knowing that first impressions might determine their fate. Remember what I have taught you, he said to them as they stood ready. Show them your intelligence, your loyalty, but never your teeth unless I give the signal. The 3 wolves flanked him as he walked toward the village, their movements synchronized like dancers following ancient choreography. Etan felt pride swell in his chest as he watched them, heads high, ears alert, every step displaying the dignity and grace that marked their kind. The village gathering space had filled with Apache from across the territory. Word of the demonstration had spread, drawing the curious and the concerned in equal measure. Etan spotted familiar faces among the crowd, hunters who had shared his campfires, women who had helped care for his wife during her final illness, children who had grown up hearing stories of his warrior exploits. Chief Nalnish waited in the center of the circle, his ceremonial headdress catching the morning light. The eagle feathers that crowned his head spoke of honor earned through decades of leadership. Though Etan noticed how the chief's weathered features showed the strain of governing during troubled times, Delsin Ironfoot stood nearby, his arms crossed and expression skeptical. Several other council members flanked him, their faces showing varying degrees of suspicion and concern. You have brought them, Nalnish observed as Etan approached. As promised, Etan replied. Makia, Ayana, Tiva, meet the leaders of our people. The 3 wolves arranged themselves in a perfect line, their amber eyes scanning the gathered crowd with alert intelligence. A murmur rippled through the spectators as they saw the creatures up close for the first time. They are larger than I expected, admitted Chaska Running Horse, an elder whose opinion carried weight among the people. Wild wolves grow large when well fed and protected, Delsin interjected. The question is whether they remain controllable as they age. Etan gestured with his hand, and the three wolves immediately sat in perfect unison. Another gesture brought them to their feet. A soft whistle sent Ayana trotting to the left, while a clicking sound directed Makia to the right. Tiva remained at Etan's side, his eyes never leaving his human companion's face. Impressive training, Chief Nalnish admitted, but training can fail when instinct takes control. Watch, Etan said simply. He reached into his pouch and withdrew strips of dried meat, tossing them on the ground before each wolf. The creatures looked at the food, but did not move, their eyes fixed on Etan's face. Eat, he commanded in Apache. Only then did the wolves lower their heads to claim their reward, their movements deliberate and respectful. They show discipline, Chaska acknowledged. But Delsin raises valid concerns about their nature. As if summoned by his words, a commotion arose from the village edge. Several Apache men approached leading horses, their faces flushed with anger and exertion. Chief Nalnish called out the lead rider, a young warrior named Etan. We bring news from the white settlement at 3 Rivers. Speak, the chief commanded. More attacks last night, Etan reported breathlessly. 4 cattle killed, their throats torn out. The settlers are organizing hunting parties. They say Apache wolves are responsible. A shocked silence followed this announcement. All eyes turned toward Etan and his 3 wolves, who remained motionless despite the tension crackling through the air. Where were your wolves last night? Delsin demanded. At my homestead, as always, Etan replied firmly. They sleep beside my fire each evening. Can anyone verify this claim? The chief asked. Etan felt the weight of isolation settling on his shoulders. His solitary lifestyle, once a choice born of grief, now left him without witnesses to vouch for his wolves' whereabouts. I am a man of honor, he said quietly. My word should be sufficient. Honor does not explain dead cattle, Delsin shot back. The settlers demand action. If we cannot prove Apache innocence, they will assume Apache guilt. Young Etan stepped forward, his expression troubled. There is more, Chief. The settler leader, a man named Garrett Pike, has sent word through the territorial agent. He demands compensation for livestock losses, or the right to hunt wolves on Apache lands. The implications struck the gathered people like a physical blow. Allowing armed white settlers onto Apache territory violated treaties and tradition alike, but refusing might bring worse consequences. Show them, Delsin said suddenly, pointing at Etan's wolves. Show them what your pets do when faced with prey. Before Etan could object, Delsin whistled sharply to his own horse. The animal, trained for warfare, reared up on its hind legs, hooves flashing dangerously close to the crowd. The reaction was instantaneous. All 3 wolves surged forward, not toward the horse, but between it and the gathered people. They formed a protective line, hackles raised and low growls rumbling from their chests. But they did not attack. They waited, muscles coiled with restrained power, eyes fixed on Etan for guidance. Down, Etan commanded, and immediately the wolves relaxed. Though they remained alert, the demonstration had the opposite effect of what Delsin intended. Instead of showing wild aggression, the wolves had displayed protective instinct and perfect discipline. Several council members exchanged meaningful looks. They defend their pack, Chaska observed thoughtfully. Including us, it seems. Pretty tricks, Delsin sneered, though uncertainty flickered in his eyes. But tricks do not explain dead livestock or angry settlers. Chief Nalnish studied the wolves with new interest. Perhaps the explanation lies elsewhere. Perhaps other wolves roam our territory, truly wild ones seeking easy prey. Or perhaps, came a new voice from the crowd's edge, someone wishes us to believe it is wolves when the truth lies in different shadows. All heads turned to see Bidsy Yellowbird approaching, his ancient face grave with knowledge that came from years of observing both men and beasts. The old warrior's words hung in the morning air like smoke from a signal fire, carrying implications that would change everything Etan thought he knew about the threats facing his unusual family. The eagle feather headdress rested on its ceremonial stand in Chief Nalnish's lodge. each plume representing a deed of valor earned through decades of leadership. But as autumn painted the canyon walls in shades of fire, the chief's burden grew heavier with each passing day. Etan adjusted the beaded band across his forehead, the traditional ornament feeling foreign after months of tension within his community. Tonight marked the harvest moon ceremony, a time when Apache families gathered to give thanks for the season's bounty. His presence had been specifically requested by the chief, though Etan suspected the invitation carried deeper purpose than mere tradition. The wolves sensed his unease as he prepared for the evening. All three had reached full maturity now, their physical presence commanding respect even from those who questioned their place among the Apache people. Makia's midnight coat gleamed with health, while Ayana's silver-gray fur caught moonlight like captured starshine. Tiva, though still the smallest, possessed an almost mystical awareness that never failed to astound those who observed him closely. "You must remain here tonight," Etan told them as he prepared to leave. "The ceremony is for humans alone," Tiva whined softly, pressing against Etan's leg in a gesture of concern that seemed to understand more than mere animal instinct should allow. The village buzzed with activity as families gathered around the great fire. Children ran between the dances, while elders shared stories that connected the present to the ancient past. For a moment, Etan felt the familiar ache of loss, memories of attending such ceremonies with Ayana and little Naiche, when his world had been complete. "Windrunner," called a voice that made his heart skip unexpectedly. He turned to see Kira Stormcrow approaching, her dark hair adorned with silver ornaments that caught the firelight. She moved with the grace of a natural healer. The woman who had tended his wife during her final illness and shown kindness when grief threatened to consume him entirely. "Kira," he acknowledged, surprised by how her presence lightened the weight he had been carrying. "I have heard troubling stories," she said, settling beside him on a fallen log that served as a bench. "About pressure from the council regarding your wolves." Etan nodded, studying her face in the flickering light. Kira possessed the kind of beauty that came from inner strength rather than mere appearance, weathered hands that had eased countless suffering, eyes that held both compassion and steel. "Delsin grows bolder in his opposition," Etan admitted. "He uses fear of the white settlers to turn people against us. And what do you think of his fears?" she asked carefully. Etan considered his words. Over the past weeks, he had begun to notice subtle changes in how various Apache treated him. Some showed increased respect, having witnessed his wolves' intelligence and loyalty. Others seemed more distant, as if his unusual companions marked him as somehow dangerous. "I think fear makes people see threats where none exist," he said finally. "My wolves have harmed no one." "I believe you," Kira said simply. "But belief and proof are different things when accusations fly." As if summoned by their conversation, Delsin Ironfoot appeared at the fire's edge, his face flushed with fermented cactus wine and something darker. "The Wolf Keeper honors us with his presence," Delsin announced loudly enough for nearby conversations to quiet. "Tell us, Windrunner, do your pets sleep peacefully while Apache concerns grow?" Etan rose slowly, recognizing the challenge in Delsin's tone. "My wolves rest at my homestead, as they do every evening." "Convenient," Delsin sneered. "While we debate their innocence, more settlers arrive daily at Three Rivers. Their leader, Pike, promises action if we cannot control our wolf problem." Chief Nalnish approached, his ceremonial headdress catching firelight as he moved. "This is not the time for such discussions, Delsin. Tonight we celebrate the harvest. How can we celebrate when threats gather like storm clouds?" Delsin demanded. "The territorial agent has sent word. Pike demands a meeting within the week. He wants proof that Apache wolves are not responsible for livestock attacks." A murmur ran through the gathered people. The name Garrett Pike had become synonymous with trouble in recent months, his growing influence among the white settlers a source of increasing concern. What proof would satisfy such a man? Kira asked quietly. Delsin's smile held no warmth. "Perhaps the heads of the wolves in question would convince him of our good faith." The suggestion hit Etan like a physical blow. Several people gasped, recognizing that Delsin had crossed a line from criticism into open hostility. "You speak of murder," Etan said, his voice deadly quiet. "I speak of survival," Delsin shot back, "of choosing between beasts and our people's welfare." Before the confrontation could escalate further, a commotion arose from the village edge. Young scouts rode in at full gallop, their horses lathered with sweat and eyes wide with urgency. "Chief," called the lead rider, "a youth named Ahote. We bring urgent news from the eastern boundary." "Speak," Nalnish commanded. "3 Apache children from the Singing River clan have gone missing," Ahote reported breathlessly. "Little Siala, her brother Kai, and their cousin Nayeli. They were gathering berries when a sudden storm struck. No one has seen them since yesterday dawn." A chill ran through the assembled crowd. The eastern boundary ran through treacherous canyon country, filled with hidden crevices and dangerous wildlife. Children lost in such terrain rarely survived more than a day or two. "Search parties?" the chief asked. "Already formed," Ahote replied. "But the storm washed away tracks. The canyons are a maze. We need trackers with exceptional skill." All eyes turned toward Etan, recognizing his reputation as one of the finest trackers in Apache territory. But Delsin stepped forward before he could respond. "Windrunner's skills are well known," Delsin said with false courtesy. "But perhaps this situation calls for more than human abilities alone." The implication hung in the air, like smoke from the ceremonial fire. Everyone present understood that wolves possessed tracking abilities far superior to humans, able to follow scent trails across vast distances even after storms had obscured visual signs. Chief Nalnish studied Etan with calculating eyes. "Would your wolves assist in such a search?" Etan felt the weight of the moment settling on his shoulders. This represented an opportunity to prove his wolves' value to the community, but it also carried enormous risk. If anything went wrong during the search, if the children were harmed in any way while his wolves were present, the consequences would be devastating. "They would track tirelessly until the children are found," Etan said finally. "Then gather your pack," the chief commanded. "Lives hang in the balance." As the ceremony dissolved into urgent preparations, Kira touched Etan's arm gently. "Be careful," she whispered. "Some will hope you fail," Etan nodded, understanding that the search for 3 lost children had become something far more significant, a test that would determine not only the fate of his wolves, but his own place among the Apache people. The sacred stone pipe passed through weathered hands around the council circle, its carved bowl glowing with burning sage and sweet grass. Each council member drew deeply from the ancient ritual, seeking wisdom from the spirits that guided Apache decisions since time beyond memory. But tonight, the smoke seemed to carry discord rather than unity. Etan knelt outside the ceremonial lodge, his 3 wolves arranged beside him in perfect formation. Inside, the council debated their fate following the successful rescue of the 3 missing children. For 2 days and nights, his wolves had tracked through treacherous canyon country, following scent trails that human noses could never detect. When they finally found the children huddled in a cave, frightened but unharmed, even Delsin had been forced to acknowledge their skill. Yet acknowledgement and acceptance remained as different as lightning and thunder. The children live because of their efforts. Chief Nalnish's voice carried clearly through the lodge walls. Ziala Kai and Nayeli breathed tonight because Windrunner's wolves succeeded where our best trackers failed. A single success does not erase ongoing concerns. Nelson's reply crackled with barely contained frustration. The territorial agent arrived this morning with new demands from Pike. The white settlers grow more aggressive with each passing day. Etan stroked Tiva's graying muzzle, feeling the wolf's steady heartbeat against his palm. In the weeks since the rescue, his relationship with the Apache community had grown even more complex. Families whose children had been saved showed him deep gratitude, but others seemed more fearful than before, as if his wolves' abilities marked them as creatures beyond natural law. The pipe ceremony continued inside, while outside, storm clouds gathered on the horizon. The weather matched Etan's mood as he remembered the morning's confrontation with the territorial agent, a thin, nervous man named Forsyth, who spoke for white interests with the authority of distant government. Agent Forsyth brought documents, came another voice from the council chamber. Chaska Running Horse, the respected elder. Official complaints from Three Rivers Settlement. Pike demands action within 1 moon cycle. What manner of action? Asked Nalnish. Removal of all wolves from Apache territory, Delsin answered with satisfaction, evident in his tone. Permanent removal. Etan's jaw tightened as he listened. Through the lodge entrance, he could see the sacred pipe's ember, glowing like an angry eye in the darkness. The ceremony that should have brought clarity seemed instead to deepen the divisions, fracturing his world. There is more, Delsin continued. Pike has offered compensation, silver and trade goods, for proof that Apache wolves no longer threaten white livestock. The mention of payment caused Etan's blood to run cold. He had seen how greed could corrupt even honorable men, turning allies into enemies and principles into bargaining chips. A new voice joined the discussion, Kira Stormcrow, who as a healer held the right to speak before the council in matters affecting community welfare. With respect, she said, her words carrying the quiet authority earned through years of service. Has anyone investigated whether Apache wolves truly cause these attacks? The patterns described seem unusual for natural wolf behavior. What patterns? Nalnish asked. The kills show excessive violence, Kira explained. Cattle torn apart beyond what wolves would do for food. Multiple animals slaughtered but not eaten. These suggest rage rather than hunger, Delsin scoffed audibly. You defend these creatures because you have feelings for their keeper. Your judgment is clouded by sentiment. The accusation hung in the smoky air like a thrown spear. Etan felt heat rise in his cheeks, understanding that Delsin had weaponized the growing connection between himself and Kira. My judgment comes from examining the evidence, Kira replied coolly. Something others seem reluctant to do. Evidence? Delsin's voice grew sharp. The evidence is dead livestock and angry white settlers. The evidence is threats of military action if we cannot control our territory. Bidsy Yellowbird's ancient voice cut through the tension like a blade. In my 90 winters I have seen many deceptions. Truth often hides behind the obvious, waiting for patient eyes to find it. Speak plainly, old man, Delsin demanded. Someone benefits from this conflict, Bidsy said simply. Someone profits when Apache and whites distrust each other. Perhaps we should ask who gains when our attention focuses on wolves rather than human treachery. Etan leaned forward, straining to hear more of this intriguing suggestion. Beside him, the 3 wolves seemed to sense his tension, their amber eyes scanning the darkness for threats only they could detect. The council's debate continued for another hour before the lodge flap opened and Chief Nalnish emerged, his ceremonial headdress showing the weight of difficult decisions. The other council members followed, their faces reflecting the divisions that had grown wider rather than narrower during their deliberations. Windrunner, the chief called. Approach! Etan rose smoothly, his wolves flowing into position beside him with practiced grace. The sight of the 3 magnificent creatures caused several council members to step back instinctively, though whether from fear or respect remained unclear. The council has reached a decision, Nalnish announced. Your wolves will be given one final opportunity to prove their innocence. How? Etan asked, though he suspected he would not like the answer. Delsin stepped forward, unable to hide his satisfaction. Pike has agreed to a demonstration. Tomorrow, at the Three Rivers settlement, your wolves will be tested under controlled conditions. If they show no aggression toward livestock, if they obey your commands perfectly, Pike will consider the matter resolved. The proposal reeked of trap, but Etan recognized he had little choice. And if they pass this test? Then the accusations end, Nalnish said. But Windrunner, if anything goes wrong, if your wolves show any sign of the behavior Pike describes, the council will have no choice but to act decisively. Etan understood the unspoken threat. Failure would mean death for his wolves and exile for himself. We will be there, he said quietly. As the council dispersed, Kira approached through the gathering darkness. Her face showed concern mixed with determination. "This feels wrong," she said softly. "Pike gains nothing from proving your wolves innocent. Why would he agree to such a test?" Etan had been wondering the same thing. In his experience, men like Pike preferred accusations to proof, a fear to understanding. "Perhaps he believes my wolves will fail," Etan suggested, "or perhaps he intends to ensure they do," Kira replied grimly. That night, as storm clouds gathered overhead, Etan sat with his 3 wolves before the dying embers of his fire. Tomorrow would test more than their training. It would test the bonds that had sustained him through nearly 2 decades of companionship. "Whatever comes," he whispered to them, "we face it together." Thunder rumbled in the distance, and Tiva's ears flicked toward sounds only he could hear. The wolf's amber eyes held an intelligence that seemed almost human as he gazed at his lifelong companion. Storm clouds were gathering in more ways than one. The war paint jar sat open on Etan's wooden table, its clay sides stained with ochre and charcoal from countless ceremonies. The traditional pigments, red earth, yellow clay, black soot, white chalk, represented the 4 directions and the eternal cycle of life and death that governed Apache existence. Tonight, however, the paints seemed to whisper of violence rather than spiritual protection. Etan dipped his finger into the red ochre, studying the rich color that had adorned Apache warriors for generations beyond counting. His grandfather had worn these same colors when fighting cavalry soldiers. His father had painted his face before hunting expeditions that fed the tribe through harsh winters. Now Etan faced a different kind of battle, one where victory meant survival and defeat meant losing everything he had rebuilt from the ashes of his former life. The demonstration at 3 Rivers Settlement loomed like a thundercloud on the horizon. 2 days had passed since the council's ultimatum, and Etan had spent every waking moment preparing his wolves for what felt increasingly like a trap. Pike's willingness to participate made no sense unless the settler leader had already decided the outcome. Makia lounged near the fireplace, his midnight coat gleaming in the lamplight. Ayana rested by the window, her silver-grey fur catching moonbeams as she maintained her vigil over the homestead approaches. Tiva, ever the most intuitive, sat directly beside Etan's chair, ember eyes reflecting an understanding that seemed to pierce the veil between human and animal consciousness. "You sense it too," Etan murmured to the smallest wolf. The wrongness in all of this, a soft knock at his door, interrupted his brooding. Etan's hand moved instinctively to his knife before recognizing the familiar pattern. 3 quick raps followed by 2 slower ones. Only one person used that particular signal. Kira Stormcrow entered quietly, her healer's bag slung across her shoulder and concern etched deep in her weathered features. She had spent the day treating injuries at the settlement, using her skills to maintain the fragile peace between Apache and white communities. "I bring news from 3 Rivers," she said, without preamble. "None of it good." Etan gestured for her to sit, noting how the 3 wolves immediately relaxed at her presence. Over the past months, they had grown to trust her almost as completely as they trusted him. "Pike has been busy," Kira continued, settling into the chair across from him. "He has gathered nearly 30 men for tomorrow's demonstration. All armed, all eager to see your wolves fail. 30 men to watch 3 wolves?" Etan's voice carried skeptical humor. "He expects trouble, or plans to create it," Kira replied grimly. She reached into her bag and withdrew a small object wrapped in soft leather. "I found this near Pike's cabin while treating his injured cook." Etan unwrapped the bundle carefully, revealing a chunk of raw meat that reeked of something unnatural. The smell made his wolves immediately alert, their hackles rising as they caught the scent. "Poison?" he asked. "Worse. Berserker root mixed with mare's blood. Apache hunters once used it to drive prey animals into frenzied panic before the kill. A single piece of meat treated with this mixture could turn even the gentlest creature into a mindless killer." The implications struck Etan like a war club. Pike intended to drug his wolves during the demonstration, making them appear vicious and uncontrollable. The planned test was indeed a trap, designed to justify their destruction. He means to discredit us entirely, Etan said, understanding flooding through him. Kira nodded grimly. But there is more. I overheard Pike speaking with Delsin Ironfoot near the trading post. They have been meeting regularly. The revelation hit Etan harder than any physical blow. Delsin's opposition had grown beyond tribal politics. He was actively collaborating with those who sought to destroy Apache autonomy. You are certain? Etan asked, though Kira's honesty had never been questioned. I saw silver coins change hands, she confirmed. Pike pays well for information about Apache movements, council decisions, and especially details about your wolves. Etan rose and walked to the window, gazing out at the star-filled darkness that had once felt like sanctuary. Now even the familiar landscape seemed threaded with danger. How long? He asked quietly. Months, perhaps longer. Delsin has been feeding Pike information while stirring discord within our own people. The livestock attacks, the growing tensions, all orchestrated to create the crisis Pike needs to justify seizing Apache lands. The pattern became clear, with sickening clarity. Pike needed a reason to bring military force against the Apache, but direct aggression would draw unwanted attention from territorial authorities. By creating the illusion of Apache aggression through wolf attacks, he could claim self-defense when his actions escalated beyond mere settlement disputes. The berserker route would be the final proof, Etan said, pieces clicking together in his mind. Witnesses would see my wolves attack innocent livestock, confirming every accusation Pike has made, and giving him justification for whatever comes next. Kira agreed. Etan turned back to his wolves, studying their intelligent faces in the lamplight. They had become pawns in a game far larger than their simple existence, victims of human greed and political manipulation. We cannot attend the demonstration, he concluded. It is a trap designed to destroy us. Refusing would also destroy you, Kira pointed out. The council would see it as admission of guilt. Pike would claim Apache refusal proves their duplicity. The dilemma seemed impossible. Attending the demonstration meant walking into certain betrayal, but refusing would accomplish Pike's goals just as effectively. There might be another way, Kira said thoughtfully, but it would require great risk. Speak. What if we turn Pike's trap against him? What if we attend the demonstration, but control the circumstances? Etan waited for her to continue, seeing the healer's mind working through possibilities, with the same careful precision she applied to treating difficult injuries. The berserker route requires the wolves to eat poisoned meat, she explained. But what if they refuse all food? What if the demonstration shows their perfect discipline while revealing Pike's treachery? He would find other ways to sabotage the test, Etan objected. Perhaps, but if we can expose his collaboration with Delsin, if we can show our people how they have been manipulated, the political balance might shift. Etan considered the proposal, recognizing both its potential and its dangers. Success would vindicate his wolves while exposing the conspiracy threatening Apache independence. Failure would still result in their destruction, but at least they would die fighting rather than fleeing. What evidence do we have beyond your word? He asked. Kira smiled grimly and reached into her bag again, withdrawing a small leather pouch. Delsin is careless when he drinks. He dropped this outside Pike's cabin. The pouch contained silver coins bearing the territorial mint mark, payment that could only have come from government sources. More importantly, it also held a folded paper with handwritten notes in Apache and English, detailing tribal council decisions and wolf movements. His own hand condemns him, Etan observed. The question becomes how to use this evidence effectively. Pike commands 30 armed men tomorrow. Even exposing the truth might not prevent violence once it begins. Etan walked to his weapon rack, where his tomahawk hung beside a war lance that had belonged to his grandfather. The lance bore eagle feathers and sacred symbols, marking it as a weapon of honor rather than mere killing tool. His hand closed around its smooth shaft, feeling the weight of generations who had carried it into battle. Then we must be prepared for violence, he said quietly. The war paint jar seemed to glow in the lamplight as Etan began. applying the traditional colors to his face. Red ochre across his forehead for courage, black charcoal around his eyes for clear sight, yellow clay on his cheeks for wisdom, white chalk along his jawline for spiritual protection. His 3 wolves watched the ancient ritual with solemn attention, as if they understood that tomorrow would test more than their training. It would determine whether the bonds forged in love could survive the flames of human hatred. "We go to 3 rivers," Etan announced as he completed the war paint. "But we go as Apache warriors, not as victims seeking approval." Outside, the wind carried the scent of approaching storms, and in the distance, thunder rumbled like the drums of war. The blood-stained bandana lay crumpled in the dirt like a fallen battle flag, its once bright colors darkened by treachery that ran deeper than Etan had ever imagined. He knelt beside the evidence of betrayal, his war-painted face reflecting the horror of recognition as he identified the distinctive weave pattern, cloth he had seen wrapped around a beloved neck countless times. The demonstration at 3 Rivers had begun at dawn, with Etan and his 3 wolves arriving to find Pike's 30 armed men, arranged in a hostile semicircle around a makeshift arena. Cattle had been penned nearby, their nervous lowing creating an atmosphere of tension that made even the most disciplined creatures uneasy, but it was the sight of Kira standing beside Pike that first sent ice through Etan's veins. She wore a dress he had never seen before, expensive fabric that spoke of payment, rather than Apache craftsmanship. Her familiar healer's bag was nowhere to be seen, replaced by a small leather pouch that clinked with the sound of silver coins. When she looked at him, her eyes held no warmth, no recognition of the intimacy they had shared during long evenings planning their resistance to Pike's manipulation. "Surprised to see me here, Windrunner?" she asked, her voice carrying a cold amusement that seemed to come from a stranger wearing Kira's face. Etan felt the world tilt beneath his feet. "What is this deception?" Pike stepped forward, his weathered face split by a triumphant grin. "No deception, Apache. Simple business. You see, your lady friend has been quite helpful in arranging today's events." "Impossible," Etan breathed, but even as he spoke, pieces of a horrible puzzle began clicking into place. Kira's convenient arrival with information about the Berserker route, her detailed knowledge of Pike's plans, her suggestion that they attend the demonstration rather than flee. "She came to me months ago," Pike continued, clearly enjoying Etan's shock. "Seems she grew tired of watching you waste your affections on wild animals instead of appreciating human companionship." Kira's laugh cut through Etan like a blade. "Did you really think I could love a man who chose wolves over his own people? You became a curiosity, Etan, a broken warrior playing nursemaid to beasts while Apache children went hungry." The cruelty in her words struck deeper than any physical wound. Etan had opened his guarded heart to this woman, shared his grief and his slowly healing hope. To learn that every gesture of affection had been calculated manipulation felt like losing his family all over again. "The meat you showed me last night," he said, understanding flooding through him. "The Berserker route, real enough," Kira confirmed. "But not Pike's plan, mine. You see, I needed to ensure you would come here today. Needed you to feel like you had some control over the situation." Delson Ironfoot emerged from behind the cattle pen, his face showing not triumph but discomfort at witnessing such complete betrayal. Even he, it seemed, had not anticipated the depths of Kira's deception. "This was not our agreement," Delson said to Pike. "You promised the wolves would simply fail your test, not that innocent feelings would be weaponized." Pike shrugged dismissively. "Results matter more than methods, Apache. Your tribal council wanted proof that Windrunner's pets are dangerous. Today they'll get it." The settler leader gestured to his men, who began herding the nervous cattle closer to where Etan stood with his wolves. The 3 magnificent creatures sensed the hostility radiating from all sides, their amber eyes alert for threats that seemed to come from every direction. "Here's how this will work," Pike announced loudly enough for all to hear. "Your wolves will be tested with live cattle. If they show any aggression, any sign of the behavior that's been terrorizing our settlement, the matter is settled." Etan realized, with growing horror, that the cattle themselves had been drugged. Their eyes showed the telltale signs of berserker root poisoning, dilated pupils, frothing at the mouth, muscles trembling with barely contained rage. The moment his wolves came close enough, the maddened animals would attack, creating exactly the violent scene Pike needed to justify their destruction. "You planned all of this," Etan said, the full scope of the conspiracy becoming clear. The livestock attacks, the growing tensions, even the missing children. Kira's smile held no warmth. "The children were never in real danger. We simply needed an opportunity to showcase your wolves' tracking abilities, to make the Apache people see them as useful rather than threatening." It made today's revelation more dramatic. The manipulation was masterful in its complexity. By first making his wolves appear heroic, the conspirators had set up their fall to be more devastating. Apache witnesses who had begun to accept the unusual pack would feel doubly betrayed when they appeared to turn vicious. But as Etan studied the scene more carefully, he noticed something that gave him hope. Busy Yellowbird stood among the Apache witnesses, the ancient warrior's eyes not focused on the penned cattle, but on the men holding them. The old man's weathered face showed the calculating expression of someone who had spent 90 winters learning to see through deception. Chief Nalnish was present as well, his ceremonial headdress marking him as the official Apache representative. But Etan noticed how the chief's hand rested casually on his knife hilt, suggesting he too suspected treachery. "Begin the demonstration," Pike commanded. His men opened the cattle pen, releasing 3 drug-maddened steers directly toward Etan and his wolves. The animals charged with eyes rolling white and foam streaming from their mouths, their berserker root-induced rage making them more dangerous than any natural predator. The 3 wolves responded instantly, but not as Pike expected. Instead of attacking the cattle, they formed a protective barrier around Etan, their training and intelligence overriding every natural instinct that should have driven them to fight or flee. "Attack them," Pike shouted to his men. "The wolves are threatening the cattle." But before anyone could move, Busy Yellowbird's voice rang out with the authority of his 9 decades. "Stop," the ancient warrior commanded. "Look with clear eyes at what unfolds before you." The charging cattle had passed completely by the wolves, their drug-induced fury focused on the men who had been tormenting them. Pike's own people scrambled for safety as 3 maddened steers turned their pens into chaos. In the confusion, the blood-stained bandana fell from Kira's pouch, landing at Etan's feet like an accusation made manifest. The fabric bore a pattern he recognized. It belonged to young Ciala, one of the children supposedly rescued during the search that had first showcased his wolves' abilities. "Child's blood," Bidzi observed grimly, his ancient eyes missing nothing. "From injuries that never healed because they were never treated." The revelation struck the Apache witnesses like lightning. Kira, their trusted healer, had allowed children to suffer for the sake of her elaborate deception. Chief Nalnish stepped forward, his face terrible with controlled rage. "Explain this betrayal, woman." But Kira was already backing toward Pike's men, her true allegiance finally revealed for all to see. The ancient Apache war lance felt alive in Etan's hands as he gripped its time-worn shaft, the eagle feathers adorning its head, rustling in the desert wind, like whispered prayers from ancestors long passed into the spirit world. The weapon had belonged to his grandfather, carried into battles that shaped the very ground where Etan now made his stand against forces that threatened everything he held sacred, the canyon's stronghold. He had chosen for this final confrontation, stretched above him like the ribs of some enormous stone beast, its red walls carved by countless centuries of wind and water into a fortress that had sheltered Apache warriors since the time of legends. Natural caves pocketed the cliff faces, connected by narrow ledges that only those born to this harsh landscape could navigate safely. If he must make his last stand, this place of power seemed fitting. His 3 wolves arranged themselves around him with the practiced precision of a military unit. Makya, his midnight coat dulled by dust and stress, maintained watch over the southern approach where Pike's men would most likely advance. Ayana, her silver-grey fur catching late afternoon sunlight, kept vigil toward the east, where Delsin might bring Apache traitors to support the white settlers. Tiva, smallest but most intuitive, stayed close to Etan's side, ember eyes reflecting an intelligence that seemed to understand the gravity of their situation. The events at 3 Rivers had shattered more than just Etan's trust in Kira. They had exposed the rot of corruption that threatened to consume Apache independence itself. Pike's conspiracy reached deeper than anyone had imagined, involving not just Delsin's greed, but a network of collaboration that touched tribal council members, territorial agents, and settlers whose hunger for Apache lands had driven them to orchestrate an elaborate deception. The blood-stained bandana now rested in Chief Nulnish's possession, physical evidence of how Kira had allowed children to suffer for the sake of her manipulations. The revelation had split the Apache community like an axe splitting wood, with some calling for immediate action against the conspirators, while others counseled caution in the face of superior firepower. But caution was a luxury Etan could no longer afford. Pike's men were coming, 30 armed settlers backed by territorial authority and driven by the promise of Apache lands once their wolf problem was permanently solved. Worse, they brought with them at least a dozen Apache traitors, men who had sold their heritage for silver coins and promises of favorable treatment under white rule. You could still flee, Bidsy Yellowbird had urged during their final council meeting. Take your wolves and disappear into the deep canyons where no white man can follow. The ancient warrior's concern touched Etan's heart, but fleeing would accomplish nothing except postponing the inevitable. Pike's conspiracy required his death to succeed completely, as long as he lived. The truth about the manufactured livestock attacks and manipulated tensions remained a threat to their plans. This is where we make our stand, Etan had replied, touching the war paint that still adorned his weathered face. If we must die, we die fighting for what matters. Now, as shadows lengthened across the canyon floor, he checked his preparations one final time. Water containers filled from the hidden spring that made this stronghold defensible. Arrows fletched with eagle feathers, each one blessed according to the old rituals. His grandfather's war lance, its point honed to razor sharpness. Most importantly, the sacred medicine bundle he carried, items representing life and death. The eternal cycle that governed all existence. The sound of approaching horses echoed off the canyon walls, growing louder as Pike's force drew near. Etan counted the riders by their echoes, more than he had expected, perhaps 50 men total. The settlers had clearly decided that overwhelming force was necessary to crush all resistance at once. Tiva's ears pricked forward at sounds only he could detect. A soft whine alerting Etan to movement on the eastern approach. Through his field glass, he spotted the Apache traitors led by Delsin Ironfoot, their faces painted not for war, but for shame. They rode with heads down, men who had traded honor for survival and found both concepts equally hollow. So be it, Etan murmured, running his hand along Tiva's neck. We always knew this day would come. The smallest wolf pressed against his leg, offering comfort that transcended the boundary between species. In that simple gesture, Etan felt the weight of 19 years, countless evenings by the fire, shared hunts across sacred ground, the gradual healing of a heart broken by loss. His wolves had given him purpose when grief threatened to consume him, family when solitude seemed unbearable, loyalty when the human world proved treacherous. Pike's voice carried clearly across the canyon floor as his force took position. Windrunner, come down and face justice for the crimes committed by your beasts. The accusation rang hollow now that the truth was known, but Etan recognized it as psychological warfare designed to demoralize him before the fighting began. Pike still needed to maintain the illusion that his actions were legally justified, even if no one present believed the fiction any longer. Justice? Etan called back, his voice echoing off the stone walls. What justice can you offer when your own hands are stained with innocent blood? The territorial government has authorized the removal of dangerous animals from Apache lands, Pike replied. Surrender them peacefully, and you'll be allowed to live out your days in the reservation system. The offer was meaningless. Etan knew that Pike intended his death regardless of surrender. The settler leader couldn't afford to leave alive someone who knew the truth about his conspiracy. But the public nature of the offer served Pike's purposes, making it appear that he had attempted negotiation before resorting to force. As the sun touched the western canyon rim, painting the sky in shades of blood and fire, Etan performed the final ritual that would prepare his spirit for the battle ahead. He opened the sacred medicine bundle, withdrawing items that connected him to the eternal cycle of Apache existence. Eagle down for spiritual flight, sage for purification, red ochre for the blood of warriors, white clay for the bones of ancestors. Each item held power accumulated across generations, linking him to every Apache warrior who had ever fought to protect what mattered most. His grandfather had carried these same sacred objects into battle against cavalry soldiers. His great-grandfather had used them in conflicts with rival tribes. Now they would serve one final time in a fight that would determine not just his fate, but the future of Apache resistance to white encroachment. The three wolves seemed to sense the spiritual weight of the ceremony, their amber eyes reflecting firelight from the small blaze Etan had kindled for the ritual. They had shared his life for 19 years. Now they would share whatever death brought to this place of stone and wind. As darkness fell across the canyon, Etan heard the sounds of Pike's men moving into position for what they clearly expected to be a brief, decisive engagement. They commanded superior numbers and firepower, held legal authority from territorial government, and possessed the confidence that came from viewing their enemy as a broken relic of a defeated culture. But they had never faced an Apache warrior fighting for the only family he had left. The wolf fang necklace pressed against Etan's throat as he drew his first arrow, its carved ivory surface warm from his body heat and slick with the sweat of anticipation. The necklace had been a gift from Tiva during the wolf's adolescence, a fang lost during play that Etan had carefully shaped and strung as a symbol of their unbreakable bond. Now it seemed to pulse with its own heartbeat as he prepared to defend everything that mattered. The attack came with the grey light of dawn, Pike's forces advancing up the canyon in 2 columns, designed to pin Etan against the cliff face, while superior numbers overwhelmed his position. Muzzle flashes lit the morning shadows as rifle fire echoed off the stone walls, bullets striking sparks from the rocks around his defensive position. "Take him alive if possible." Pike's voice carried over the gunfire. "Dead men can't confess to their crimes." But Etan had no intention of providing Pike with a convenient scapegoat. His first arrow took the lead rider clean through the chest, dropping him from his saddle with a cry that sent horses rearing in panic. The second arrow found its mark in another settler's shoulder, spinning him around and sending his rifle clattering across the rocks. Makia struck like black lightning, his powerful form launching from a concealed ledge onto the back of Pike's lieutenant. The man's screams echoed off the canyon walls as nearly 200 pounds of muscle and bone drove him to the ground. But the wolf's attack wasn't meant to kill. Etan had trained his pack too well for mindless slaughter. Instead, Makia's teeth found the man's gun hand, crushing bones and making the weapon useless while leaving its owner alive. "The wolves are attacking," someone screamed. Though the cry was more terror than accuracy, Ayana materialized from behind a boulder like silver smoke, her form ghosting between the horses with supernatural grace. She didn't attack the riders directly, but instead focused on their mounts, nipping at heels and flanks with just enough force to send the animals into bucking, rearing panic. 3 men hit the ground in quick succession as their horses decided retreat was preferable to combat. Pike's carefully organized assault dissolved into chaos as his men found themselves fighting. Not just an Apache warrior, but creatures that seemed to understand tactical warfare as well as any human soldier. The wolves struck and vanished, reappeared from unexpected angles, coordinated their attacks with Etan's arrows in ways that suggested an almost telepathic communication. "Fall back," Pike ordered, his voice cracking with frustration. "Regroup at the canyon mouth." But retreat proved as dangerous as advance. Etan's arrows continued to find their marks, each shot carefully placed to wound rather than kill. He needed these men alive to testify about Pike's conspiracy when the territorial authorities investigated the aftermath. A dead man could be painted as a hero, but live witnesses with functioning tongues could speak uncomfortable truths. Tiva remained at Etan's side throughout the initial assault, the smallest wolf serving as his companion's eyes and ears while maintaining watch for threats that might approach from unexpected directions. His amber eyes tracked movement with predatory intensity, occasionally issuing soft whines that alerted Etan to dangers beyond normal human perception. "You see them too," Etan murmured, following the wolf's gaze toward a section of canyon wall that appeared empty, but Tiva's senses proved accurate. 3 of Pike's men were attempting to scale the cliff face, hoping to attack Etan's position from above, while their companions provided covering fire from below. Their movements were clumsy, more driven by desperation than skill, but they represented a real threat if allowed to reach the ledges above his defensive position. Etan's war lance became his primary weapon as the climbers drew near. The ancient weapon sang through the air with deadly precision, its eagle-feathered head striking the lead climber in the shoulder and sending him tumbling back to the canyon floor. The second man lost his grip in shock, following his companion down in a cascade of loose stone and panicked curses. Only one climber reached the ledge, a young settler whose face showed more fear than aggression. He raised his rifle with shaking hands, clearly terrified, but driven by whatever promises Pike had made about the rewards of victory. "Don't," Etan warned. His grandfather's war lance held ready, but not yet committed to the killing stroke. The young man's finger tightened on the trigger, but before he could fire, Ayana appeared beside him like a silver ghost. Her powerful jaws closed gently around his wrist, not biting, but applying just enough pressure to make holding the rifle impossible. The weapon clattered onto the stone ledge as the settler stared into amber eyes that seemed far too intelligent for any natural predator. "She could tear your throat out," Etan observed calmly, "but she chooses mercy. Perhaps you should do the same." The young settler nodded frantically, and Ayana released his wrist before bounding back to join the larger battle below. The man remained on the ledge, cradling his uninjured arm and staring after the wolf with expression caught between terror and wonder. Pike's voice rose from the canyon floor, thick with rage and desperation. "Burn them out! Set fire to everything that will hold flame." The sacred medicine bundle lay scattered across the stone ledge, its contents spilling like drops of Apache blood onto the canyon floor where Etan had fallen. Sacred herbs mingled with his life force as he pressed one hand against the rifle wound in his chest, while the other maintained its grip on his grandfather's war lance. The pain came in waves, each breath a struggle against the darkness that threatened to claim him. Pike's men had found their range with the long rifles. Their accuracy improved once fear no longer clouded their aim. The bullet had taken Etan high in the chest, spinning him around and dropping him behind the boulder that had served as his primary defensive position. Now Pike's voice echoed triumphantly across the canyon as his forces prepared for the final assault. "The Wolf Keeper is down," the settler leader announced. "Finish this!" But Etan's 3 wolves had other ideas about finishing anything. Makia's roar of rage shook loose stones from the canyon walls as the midnight-coated wolf launched himself at the nearest group of settlers. His powerful jaws found the rifle barrel of the man who had shot Etan, metal buckling under pressure that could crush bones. The weapon became useless scrap as Makia bounded away before return fire could find its mark. Ayana moved like quicksilver through the chaos, her silver-gray form seeming to teleport between positions as she systematically disabled weapons and scattered ammunition. Her intelligence showed in every calculated strike. She attacked equipment rather than flesh. creating panic without providing Pike's men with clear targets for their rage. But it was Tiva who made the ultimate choice that would determine the battle's outcome. The smallest wolf approached Etan's position with deliberate steps, his amber eyes holding an awareness that transcended normal animal consciousness. He had seen his pack leader fall, understood that the man who had saved 3 orphaned pups was now dying from wounds received in their defense. The debt could only be repaid with sacrifice. "No," Etan whispered, recognizing the intent in Tiva's gaze. "Run, old friend. Save yourself." But Tiva had made his decision 19 years ago in an abandoned cabin, when helpless cries had called out to a warrior's compassionate heart. The bond forged in that moment demanded nothing less than everything. The wolf positioned himself between Etan and Pike's advancing men, his graying muzzle lifted in challenge. No longer was he the smallest of 3 brothers. He was the guardian of the man who had become father, teacher, and packmate through 2 decades of shared existence. "Kill that beast," Pike commanded, his voice shrill with frustration at how badly his simple operation had deteriorated. Rifle fire erupted from a dozen positions, muzzle flashes lighting the dawn shadows like deadly flowers. But Tiva moved with supernatural grace, dodging between bullets that should have found their mark. His counterattack was devastating in its precision, not the mindless savagery Pike had hoped to provoke, but the calculated fury of a predator defending his family. The first settler went down with a crushed rifle stock and broken fingers. The second found himself flat on his back, with Tiva's powerful paws on his chest, staring into eyes that promised death if he moved. A third lost his weapon entirely as the wolf's jaws clamped down on the barrel with enough force to render it permanently inoperable. But there were too many of them, and Tiva was only one wolf facing a dozen armed men. A rifle butt caught him across the ribs with a sickening crack. Another blow struck his shoulder, sending him stumbling against the canyon wall. Blood began to stain his graying fur as clubs and rifle stocks found their marks. "Tiva!" Etan gasped, trying to rise despite the fire in his chest. The wolf's amber eyes found his across the chaos, and in that moment, 19 years of shared experience passed between them like a lightning flash of memory. 3 helpless pups crying for their mother, patient lessons in hunting and survival. Quiet evenings by the fire when grief seemed less overwhelming with companionship. The search for lost children that had proven their worth to the Apache people. Every moment of loyalty, love, and trust that had defined their bond. Tiva's final charge was magnificent in its fury and heartbreaking in its inevitability. The wolf struck Pike himself, sending the settler leader crashing to the ground, with claws raking across his face and powerful jaws snapping inches from his throat. For one terrible moment, the possibility of vengeance hung in the air like smoke from gunpowder. But Pike's men recovered quickly, their weapons turning toward the wolf who had dared to attack their leader. The volley of gunfire that followed seemed to last forever, echoing off the canyon walls like thunder from an angry sky. When the smoke cleared, Tiva lay motionless on the blood-stained stone, his graying fur dark with wounds that no healing could touch. But his sacrifice had accomplished what strategy could not. Pike's men stood frozen in shock at the sight of such loyalty, such devotion, such obvious intelligence in a creature they had been taught to view as nothing more than a dangerous animal. In the terrible silence that followed, Etan found the strength to speak one final time. "You wanted to see what love looks like when it refuses to surrender. Now you know." The morning sun painted the canyon walls in shades of gold and crimson as man and wolf lay dying together, their bond unbroken even by the ultimate sacrifice. The memorial stone cairn rose from the canyon floor like a prayer made manifest in rock and remembrance. Each carefully placed stone representing a life touched by the bond between an Apache warrior and 3 orphaned wolves. Chief Nalnish had overseen its construction personally, understanding that some stories transcend the boundaries between legend and truth to become something far more powerful, a testament to the courage found in unexpected places. 6 months had passed since the battle that had shattered Pike's conspiracy and exposed the corruption threatening Apache independence. The territorial investigation that followed had revealed the full scope of the deception, from manufactured livestock attacks to the systematic manipulation of both Apache and white communities for personal gain. Pike himself survived, though the scars across his face would forever remind him of Tiva's final charge. Etan sat beside the cairn in the golden light of evening, his movements still careful due to the chest wound that had nearly claimed his life. The rifle bullet had missed his heart by mere inches, lodging in his lung and leaving him unconscious for 3 days while Apache healers worked to draw him back from the edge of the spirit world. During those fever dreams, he had walked with Ayana and little Naiche through sunlit meadows where no pain existed, had hunted alongside his grandfather and father through forests that stretched beyond all horizons. But Tiva's voice had called him back. The smallest wolf had somehow survived the volley of gunfire that should have killed him instantly, his body shattered but his spirit unbroken. For 2 days he had remained at Etan's side, pressing his warmth against his unconscious companion and refusing food or water. The Apache healer said later that they had never seen such devotion from any creature, wild or domestic. The territorial governor has sent his final report to Washington, Nalnish said, settling beside the cairn with the careful movements of a man feeling his years. Pike's conspiracy reached higher than we imagined. Several officials in the territorial government have been removed from office. Etan nodded, unsurprised by the revelation. Corruption rarely confined itself to small schemes when larger opportunities presented themselves. "What of Delson?" he asked. "Exiled," the chief replied simply. "His silver coins could not buy back the honor he sold so cheaply. He walks alone now, welcome in neither Apache nor white communities." The fate seemed fitting for a man who had chosen personal gain over tribal loyalty. Delson's collaboration with Pike had cost Apache lives and threatened their very survival as an independent people. "The governor wishes to meet with you," Nalnish continued, "to offer official recognition of your service in exposing the conspiracy." Etan smiled grimly. "Politicians always seek to claim credit after the danger passes. Perhaps, but recognition brings practical benefits. Protection from future schemes like Pike's. Resources for the Apache people. Sometimes accepting praise from fools serves a greater purpose." Tiva stirred at the sound of voices, his amber eyes reflecting the last light of sunset. The wolf's presence had become legendary throughout the territory. The creature who had refused to let his master die, who had demonstrated loyalty beyond human understanding. "The story spreads beyond our lands," Nalnish observed. "White settlements speak of the Apache wolf, who chose love over survival. Some even question their assumptions about the nature of wild creatures. Indeed, the tale had taken on a life of its own. Travelers carried it to distant territories, where it was retold around campfires and in saloons, growing with each iteration, but somehow maintaining its essential truth. A broken warrior had found healing through compassion. 3 orphaned creatures had repaid kindness with ultimate loyalty. Love had proven stronger than fear, greed, or political manipulation. "Children approach me in the village now," Etan said thoughtfully. "They ask to hear about the wolves, to understand how such bonds are possible, and what do you tell them?" Etan's hand moved to stroke Tiva's graying fur, feeling the steady heartbeat that had sustained him through the darkest moments of his life. "I tell them that family is not always born of blood, that loyalty must be earned through daily acts of kindness, that love leaves tracks even death cannot erase." A comfortable silence settled between the 2 men as stars began to appear in the darkening sky. The memorial cairn seemed to glow in the starlight, each stone a prayer for the departed and a promise to remember their sacrifice. "Will you accept the governor's invitation?" Nalnish asked eventually. "Perhaps, but not for recognition or reward. If my story can prevent other conspiracies like Pike's, if it can build understanding between our peoples, then perhaps some good can come from all the pain." The chief nodded approvingly. "Wisdom often emerges from suffering if we allow it," as if responding to their words. Tiva rose slowly and padded to the cairn, pressing his muzzle against the smooth stones in a gesture of remembrance for his fallen packmates. His amber eyes reflected starlight like captured fire, and for a moment he seemed less like an aging wolf than a spirit guardian watching over sacred ground. "He knows they are gone," Etan observed quietly. "But he also knows they remain present in ways that matter." The wind carried the scent of sage and juniper across the canyon, familiar fragrances that spoke of home and belonging. In the distance, a nightbird called, not the mournful cry of loss, but the welcoming song of creatures settling into safety. Years would pass. Tiva would eventually join his packmates in the spirit world, leaving Etan to face old age with only memories for companionship. But those memories would sustain him, would remind him daily that love once given truly never dies. The legend would outlive them all, the Apache warrior who rescued 3 wolf pups and discovered that family comes in many forms. Children yet unborn would hear the story and learn that compassion creates bonds stronger than blood, that loyalty freely given becomes sacred obligation, that even the smallest acts of kindness echo through generations. The memorial cairn would remain long after its builders had joined the spirits, a testament carved in stone and memory to the truth that love leaves a trail even death cannot cover. As the stars wheeled overhead in their eternal dance, man and wolf sat together in peaceful silence, their bond unbroken by loss, undiminished by time. "Eternal as the stones beneath the desert sky, he kept your spirit tethered to this world," Bidsy Yellowbird had explained. "When you were ready to follow your wife and son into the beyond, his love anchored you to life." Now Tiva lay beside Etan in the evening shadows, his graying muzzle resting on weathered knees, while amber eyes watched the play of firelight across the memorial stones. The wolf moved carefully, his injuries having healed as much as they ever would. But the bond between them had only grown stronger through shared sacrifice. Makia was gone, claimed by an infection that had started from his battle wounds and spread despite all efforts to save him. The midnight wolf had died as he had lived, with dignity and surrounded by the love of his pack. Ayana had followed him into the spirit world just weeks later, her silver form simply fading away like morning mist, as if she could not bear to remain in a world without her brother. Only Tiva remained, scarred and aging, but fiercely loyal to the man who had become his entire world. The sound of approaching footsteps drew Etan's attention to the canyon path, where a familiar figure approached through the gathering dusk. Chief Nalnish walked slowly, his ceremonial headdress replaced by simple traveling clothes that spoke of a leader who had learned to value substance over appearance.